In this video, I'll be sharing with you the 5 most common mistakes to avoid when creating pie charts. It's JP Labuskaghni from the Art of Visualization, where we help you become a better data visualization expert. Now, a lot of people incorrectly use pie charts, or simply avoid them, saying that they don't see much value in working with this simple chart type. How come then they are still around and still being used so widely? Well, I can tell you through my years of visualization experience that the pie chart is one of the most powerful charts when used correctly. At the same time, I've seen many data scientists fail at it, and therefore today is not a tutorial on how to create such a simple pie chart, but rather pointing out what to avoid for maximum impact when you're using pie charts. I'm excited to be able to share with you my top 5 mistakes to avoid when creating pie charts. Also, make sure you stick around to the end, as I will show you what alternative chart types you might want to consider using. Mistake number 1. Having more than 7 distinct values in your pie chart. This is single-handedly the biggest mistake that destroys a pie chart, and also why I decided to place this at the number 1 position. In this example, where we will visualize the sales contribution by city, there are 542 more distinct cities being shown. It's impossible to derive much value from this pie chart since the user is overwhelmed by all the data points being displayed here. And worst of all, using it in this manner in a dashboard is simply wasting a lot of expensive real estate on the dashboard. Therefore, you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to show here? Are you trying to geographically indicate which cities are the biggest contributor? Well, for that there are much better suited chart type, like a filled map to consider. But let us assume for some reason you are stuck on using a pie chart. So here my golden rule is never have a pie chart with more than 7 distinct values in your dimension. Not only is the user only able to focus on a handful of facts at a given moment, but visually it becomes impossible to distinguish between the values. So what then if you have more than 7 distinct values? Go back to your data, see if there's not perhaps a better dimension to use, perhaps a category that's regrouping your data. In our example, the location data is part of hierarchy, and if you use a higher level in the hierarchy, let's say state or province, it would already significantly improve the pie chart. But then we still have 59 distinct states. And as you know, my golden rule is set at 7 distinct values. So we can agree then that in this instance, using one level higher in the hierarchy does not make it much better, but it might depending on your data. Let me show you how I solve for this in 2 steps. Firstly, ensure that the 7 biggest cities contributing are visible and properly labeled, and then secondly group the remaining cities in a group called Other. This allows the viewer to still see all of the data, but still be able to relate the cities to each other and also the overall contribution. Mistake number 2 is using legends and not labels. This should be avoided at all costs, since one of the well-known best practices in data visualization is to present all of the information in the same place so that the viewer does not have to go and look for additional information elsewhere. As soon as the viewer focuses on any other part and needs to do any complex interpretation, you've already failed them, and they're already distracted by the next thing. Now, in this example where the legend is placed on the side, it makes 0 sense to the user to understand what is the biggest versus the smallest contributor. Also, how to interpret and relate it to the rest of the data points. Rather make use of labels, placing it on or directly next to the slices. A good practice is to include both the dimension value as well as the measure and contribution to the overall amount. And yes, I know currently they are showing more than 7 distinct values. Well done if you spotted that. I will leave you to go and correct for it. Oh, and a quick tip. Do make sure the labels are visible. It means big enough and not overlapping, and do make sure they're not cut off. Mistake number 3 is the incorrect use of color. Now this might sound quite obvious, but it's often overlooked, and there are a couple of things we need to consider here. Firstly, let's talk about color blindness. Worldwide, there are estimated to be over 300 million people with color blindness. That's almost the same number of people in the entire population of the USA. So there's no point in spending an awful amount of time creating a wonderful chart and then some of your audience can't use it properly, or even worse, use it incorrectly. The good news here is that there's a color blindness palette available within Tableau. Even though it's limited to only 10 colors, it's perfect when you consider we are aiming for maximum of 7 distinct dimension values. Secondly, we also need to ensure that the colors are easily distinguishable and the gradient of color used is sufficiently different for that purpose, especially on specific background colors in the same hue or shade. You can see this in the example. It's rather difficult to distinguish between the different slices with a quick glance. Now lastly, also make sure that you consider any company colors or brand template that might already be existing in your organization. This will ensure you get the message over correctly the first time and also give a sense of familiarity to the audience right from the onset. Mistake number 4 is stacking multiple pie charts next to each other. This is quite common when users want to introduce an additional dimension to compare against. Now to this day, I've not found a proper example where this is really necessary, and I think it creates, in my opinion, just more confusion and sometimes long debates in meetings. Now that's time that could have been well spent better on finding business solutions or opportunities within your data. In this example, each pie chart looks exactly the same, but upon close inspection, you will note that Sadie has 5% less technology sales as a percentage of her total sales than Chuck has at 39. Not only was it difficult to spot, but also quite a mouthful trying to explain it. So I would say, rather steer clear from implementing it in this way. Sticking to a single pie chart or perhaps reverting to a different chart type might be better fit for purpose. Mistake number 5 is layering the pie chart with multiple dimension. Now, as a solution to the above issue in the previous point, some would argue that you can simply stack the dimensions in the pie chart, starting with the dimension with the fewest different values in the middle, in this case category, and then supplementing it with another dimension, subcategory. Now yes, this is possible of course, and using the color shelf correctly can create some additional segmentation, so especially useful for hierarchies. But poorly executed, as you can see from this example, it's still rather difficult to relate the outer segments with each other. The slices for storage and binders is not obviously different if it wasn't for the label indicating this. One should always take a step back and ask oneself, is this really necessary, or might there be another chart type which would suit the use case better? Speaking of alternative chart types, earlier in the video I mentioned that I will show you some alternative charts to use which are closely related to the pie chart. Let's unpack these 3 examples briefly. The first is a tree map chart, very similar to a pie chart in the sense that it uses a space, blocks in this case instead of the slices, to indicate how a value relates to the overall population. Now, even though it uses space much more optimally with the different orientation and layouts of the blocks or segments, it might still be difficult to interpret the segments in relation to each other. An example here is machines, accessories, and copiers. At first glance, they seem like equals, but when the label is added, you can see that they differ 1% from each other. Another great consideration is a stacked bar chart, where the total also equals 100%, and the different dimension values are stacked on top of, or as in this example, next to each other. It works especially well when you are constrained for space in a dashboard. Personally, I'm a big supporter of this chart type, and it can sometimes even be used as a legend replacement. You might be thinking, what about a donut chart? Well, just like the real thing, it is simply a pie chart with a hole in the middle. Even though it might look nicer than the boring pie chart, it could be argued that it's more difficult to interpret given that it doesn't have the full slices, which normally helps your brain make the distinction. I have to add though that donut charts are not native to Tableau, but super simple to create if you know how. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see how I create this specific one. Knowing how to create the perfect pie chart and alternatives are just a start to creating an impactful dashboard. Check out our video on how to create the perfect interactive dashboard, where I take you step by step through it and share loads of tips and tricks to take your dashboard building skill to the next level. Before I let you go, please do see the cheat sheet we created for you for free download. Yours to keep to refer to whenever working with a pie chart. The link is in the description.